In this video, I'm going to talk about understanding weights in the Moodle Gradebook. So there are a variety of ways to approach this idea of the relative value of each item inside of a gradebook. Oftentimes, we do that naturally by thinking of a percentage value. So this quiz is worth 5%, this exam is worth 20%, the final exam is worth 25%, those kinds of things. Moodle can allow you to use these weights in a relatively straightforward fashion, but there's a few more details if you want to think about more sophisticated uses of weights inside of your gradebook. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the aggregation methods that exist in the Moodle Gradebook. So aggregation methods are just how's it going to calculate an actual grade out of all of this stuff here. If I leave it just like it is, by default, it's what's called the simple weighted mean of grades. So it's going to average these things together. And the fact that these are graded out of 10 points and this is graded out of 100 points essentially weighs this item as 10 times greater than any of these items. Just the point value itself, when you do a simple average, it creates sort of an inherent weighting structure. Sometimes, though, the point values that we use for various things don't have any actual bearing on what that item is worth relative to other items, and in that case we need to actually tell Moodle that something is worth more. So for example, perhaps this thing here is really worth the same as all of these put together. So in that case, rather than it being 100 and relative to these 10 each, we need to have that a little bit different. It's easiest to do that by simply using weights rather than trying to rejigger the way we handle our points. I'm going to come up here to this edit that's to the right of the name of the class, go to Edit Settings, and one of the first options here I have is the aggregation method. So we just talked our way through simple weighted mean of grades, but we're going to do weighted mean of grades now. And then I'm going to go ahead and save my changes. Now I have an option to put in weights. Now most people think of these as percentages. So in this case, if I wanted this to be worth the same as all of these put together, the easiest way for me to think of that would be to make this worth 50% of 100%, and then each of these would then would need to be worth 12.5%. If I think of them as percentages of 100, the math is relatively easy to pull off. Once I've entered anything into the weights, I do need to go ahead and save those changes before I do anything else, or they'll just go back to zero. So that works, and that's a perfectly reasonable way to do it, and it's the way most of you will choose to do it. But I just want to show you that it doesn't have to be done this way. If my whole point was that this was worth twice as much of these, I could have just set these all to 1, 1, 1. That totals 4, so if this is worth, actually not twice as much, but the idea is that this is worth as much as these are all put together, then that becomes worth 4. And those are weights. Sure, they're not percentages that add up to 100, but they don't have to be, because the idea is, what is this worth relative to these other things here? So now what it's going to do, what Moodle's going to do, is it's going to say this 100 is worth 4 out of 8. This 10 is worth 1 out of 8. So it will multiply and then average, and then that ends up actually, I should take that back. It doesn't multiply and then average. What it does is it says, what percentage of this 10 points did this person get? They got, let's say they got a 9 out of 10. I'm going to say they got 90% of this item. So you multiply that by 1, so that'll be 90. And let's say they got this one right, so that'll be 100. And they got this one right completely, that'll be 100, and then they dismally failed this one. They got 5 points out of 10, and as a result, that's going to be 50. And then this, it's going to say what percentage out of these 100 points, and let's say you got 85, so it'd be 85 times 4. And then that's what gets averaged after that. My point is that you don't have to be too concerned about how weights add up as long as everything is the same relative to what you expect them to be. That is, if you expect this to be worth as much as all these put together, you need to make sure that those add up that way, whether you're using a percentage of 100 or whether you're using just some points like this. Most of us, like I said, we tend to work off of this, I have to be using percentage of 100 approach, because our brain can wrap itself around what that means. But if you have a lot of items in your Moodle gradebook, like a ton of them, sometimes it's easier to think in terms of their relative value to each other and just use those smaller numbers. Another way that weights can become important is if you have a category full of items. It's because I didn't save what I was doing. So let's say I make a new category, and I'm going to put my quizzes inside of there. And just as an aside, I can do that in one swoop by checking all those and then coming down here, moving them into that folder. Okay, so now it doesn't matter what these are worth. This could be worth 10, 10, 10, 10, makes no difference. All I'm saying is now I want my quiz section to be worth half the grade in the course and my discussion forum to be worth half the grade in the course. So that's another way, and perhaps an even easier way, to mentally wrap your head around the relative value of different items inside of your gradebook. Now let's say I'm just going to add in one more item here into that quizzes. It's not really a quiz, but I'm just creating a little column, and set that to 100. And I'm going to put that inside the quizzes area. Save my changes. Okay, so now I've got that one. And if it goes to just average all of these now and say that's worth 50% of the course grade, it's going to really weigh it heavily towards this quiz 5, because remember what I said at the very beginning, when you're doing these simple weighted mean of grades, which is just an arithmetic mean, just an average, it's going to use the point values, because this is now going to be 140 divided by 5, so obviously this one plays a big role. So I need to create some weights inside of this category to tell Moodle that all these things should be worth the same. To do that, I come to the edit that's to the right of my category title, and I'm going to change that to weighted mean of grades so that I get a spot for weights. Now, by default, it puts a 1 in there because this is the most common reason why people use weights inside of a category, is to tell Moodle that everything is worth the same amount. So I can just leave all those at 1. I don't have to make that 20, 20, 20, 20, 20 and say, let's add up to 100% of this category. This is just saying they all have the same relative weight to each other. Doesn't matter what their point value is. So if the student made a 9, a 9, a 9, a 9, and a 10, that's going to say 90% times 1, 90% times 1, 90% times 1, 90% times 1. We'll say this was a 990 also, so it matches. It's still going to be 90% times 1, even though it's out of 100 points. So that's how you can use weights inside of categories to ensure that everything is worth the same value relative to each other inside the category without having to worry about quizzes. Quizzes are so much easier to set up if you don't, especially short, small quizzes that are mostly just for some repetitive learning. It's a pain to sit there and have to figure out, okay, these need to be worth 2 points so that it adds up. Oops, I've got 8 questions. That's 16. That doesn't seem right. They need to be 10 like all the others, so I need to change it to 0.8 points. You don't have to do any of that. Just let them be the points they're going to be and deal with their different point values here inside the gradebook. So that is kind of an overview of the different ways to use weights inside of Moodle.